And before we jump into the freedom topic, right? I don't know if you want to tell us your story, how you got started. I know you have a very, you call it
how much time we have.
you call it an uncommon life.
Uncommon life, right? I could go down a rabbit hole and we could spend hours, but I know we only have.
I know you've done a lot of things, and it's just it's very motivating.
I'll give you the shortest version of the story as I can. I was born at a young age in upstate New York, in a very small town. Actually, that's the long version.
That's the long version.
But it's true. I'm kind of a hick from upstate New York. My village had 395 people.
Wow.
That was small. So I considered myself to be pretty common, kind of average. Although I was smart enough to get, really good grades in high school, but I learned in college that's because the high school was ridiculously easy and didn't have any curves, and straight A's came kind of naturally to me, and I got my butt handed to me when I went to Colgate University, which is a pretty rigorous institution. At any rate, I'll link my story to the topic of freedom. Nobody is free until they kind of wake up to the forces and the recognition of the conditioning that has shaped who they are, and that conditioning was not under their control. So the way this worked out for me is, here I am. My condition, everyone's conditioning starts the moment you're born, probably preconception, or not conception, but pre-birth. So your brain starts to take on certain shapes and structures, and starts to eventually make meaning. And all of that is training. It's training the mind, and then the mind will. Because of its blueprinting, will shape the body. Then the body will begin to take the shape of the mind, depending upon how the mind feels about the body. So that's we're talking about here the mind-body connection. At any rate, so my conditioning started growing up in a very small town, in a family where my father and mother, wonderful people, but very, very kind of reckless with their words. A lot of abuse, a lot of there was a lot of negativity going on, a lot of alcohol. Many generations on both sides of the family. And so that was there. At the same time, little Mark kind of took that in stride and executed strategies to protect himself and to navigate the world. And that led to me to be, a pretty good athlete, because for me, especially endurance sports were a great opportunity to kind of get away from all that and to clear my head and also because of some of the verbal and physical stuff that was going on, I was pretty tough physically. Mm-hmm. So, it was very hard to hurt me mentally, emotionally, physically, because I kind of stuffed a lot of that stuff like you do growing up in those scenarios. And of course, that worked to my benefit, because when I went through SEAL training, they couldn't hurt me. There was nothing that the SEAL instructors could bring on that was going to be anything harder than what I had dealt with. And I know a number of my teammates who have shared similar sympathies. But at the same time, the double-edged sword of all these, this conditioning is that, there's a positive and a negative to everything in your life. It depends upon kind of how you perceive it and what you make of it. And that's where freedom comes in. You have the choice. But most people don't recognize they have the choice, and nor did I at the time. So the negative side was, I really was pretty emotionally immature. I had a very narrow range of emotional awareness. I was locked up like a drum when it came to, relationships. I went through a lot of relationships that I just kind of torched just because I didn't know how to communicate, and I was kind of an imbecile, basically. But it wasn't my fault. It was all that conditioning. So I do well enough to get into school, recruited to swim at Colgate, kind of party and swim my way through 4 years, end up with a whopping 2.8 GPA, which wasn't awful, but it wasn't great. But it was good enough to get me a position with a company that was hiring with a number of other companies. It was a big 8 accounting firm called Coopers & Lybrand. It's now PricewaterhouseCoopers. So they were looking for liberal arts graduates who were not accounting majors to come in and be part of this program with 70 others. And they were going to send us to NYU, Stern School of Business, to get our master's in accounting. And then once we had that, we could sit for the CPA exam and become good auditors. And the idea there was that it was a test to see whether liberal arts graduates who they train in the accounting and auditing would make better partners managers and partners one day because they'd have more perspective, as opposed to, just a number cruncher who went into school for accounting and then became a CPA and went to work for those firms, which was the majority. So I joined that I got that offer out of college, and I was quite surprised that I actually got it, because most of my peers who got it were like straight A students and whatnot, but they saw something in me, I guess. I did have to go into NYU on academic probation for the first semester, but I got straight A's and I was off to the races. Something kind of shifted in me when I got to New York, and started doing that. I had to become much more focused. We're working full time during the day, going to school at night. I was still keeping up my physical training, so I would go out for a 5-6 mile run every morning. I would go to the gym at lunch when all my peers were, going and eating their big greasy burger, and having a drink. And the most momentous thing that happened, Abel, is that I talk about this in my book, The Way of the Seal, as well as Unbeatable Mind, is I was looking for something to do in the time block where Cooper's had to let us off to go to NYU, and the time we actually had to be at NYU, which was 2 hours later. So Cooper's let us off at 5, which is pretty unheard of for that career, but this was kind of a joint work study program. But we didn't have to be down to World Trade Center, the old World Trade Center, for NYU classes until 7:30. So most of my peers would go home and have dinner and change and, maybe study, prep. I looked at that as another training block. There was something in me that just was really committed to maintaining my physical fitness and kind of the need for that mental anchor, right? Because of the turbulence and chaos of my childhood. So I was like looking for something to do. I didn't want to go to the gym again. I didn't want to go for another run. I didn't have enough time to really do a sport. And what I found was a martial art. And it just so happens that this martial art, this karate style, the grandmaster, who was also the founder of this karate style, was also a Zen teacher. And so within a few months of me starting this martial art, I had taken up Zen, starting with these Thursday night sessions where we would sit, meditate for an hour, and have a little kind of talk afterwards. And I liked it so much that I started, I bought myself a little Zen bench and I started training every morning. This is in 1985. So before really anyone knew what meditation was in America, or at least it was very fringy. So here I am at 21, 22, 23 years old, meditating every day, training hard physically every day and mentally, getting my MBA at night, getting all sorts of new learnings, working as an early auditor. But it was the time in the meditation bench which completely shattered my idea of what I was or who I was. Back to the idea of freedom. I was not free at all up until that point. I was living the conditioning of my family. I was living their ideas, their needs for me. I was living the condition of my culture, even the language that I grew up with, which was, English first. Pretty much English only, unfortunately, even though I've tried to learn Spanish. I took it for 4 years in college, 1 year in 4 years in high school, 1 year in college, and I'm still not good at it. That's my fault. At any rate, but sitting on that meditation bench, right, and learning to control my mind first and learning to then separate from my thoughts and emotions and recognize that I am not that. Those are happening to me or through me, but they're not me, was a profound shift. You can call it waking up to the reality of this conditioned life that you've been living. And I could see, it took about a year, maybe a year and a half of my Zen training where I could start to see that I was living this dream that was not mine. Like it was spoon fed me. And there wasn't a thing about public accounting that I liked. There wasn't a thing about going to school to get my MBA that I was finding nurturing. Interesting maybe, but nurturing, no. It wasn't bringing happiness. It wasn't making me feel fulfilled. It didn't feel like it was my calling in life. Mm-hmm. And so I started to look at all that. And so the more I looked at the things that weren't what I felt like it was right, the more insight I got into what would be more appropriate for me. In other words, by looking at the negative and saying, I am not passionate about this. this business career I'm in. I am not passionate about being inside and wearing a suit every day. I'm not even passionate about this idea of making, tons of money, which I'm not adverse to it, but I don't lead with it, right? Even at that age of 22, 23, I'm like, I don't lead with making money. I'm not going to define myself by how much money I make. So yet all of my peers are. And so I'm like, okay, so if these are all things I'm not passionate about, and I don't feel like this is my purpose, and I might be actually breaching some of my principles, such as the last one I just mentioned, that money is not the end all be all, and I don't work just for the money.
Mm-hmm.
Then why have I gone down this road? What have I missed here? And so I started to ask that question, like, what have I missed? If that's not who I am and what I'm supposed to be, then who am I and what am I supposed to be?
Sure.
All these questions were paralleling, all these questions happening generally when I was sitting on that meditation bench, either in the morning, and I started a little journaling practice before that was really popular, or in those Thursday night hour-long sessions, I would just have these really kind of radical insights.
Was it only when you were meditating, and did it happen earlier in life, or?
No. Well, earlier in life, I had some moments that kind of, how do I say it, showed me that there may be more going on than what you're taught, right? For instance, I remember having, I used to get out and hike in the Adirondacks. We had a summer house up on Lake Placid, and, to get out of the house, and, it felt good for me to be outside. So I would go on these long hikes, often alone. And I remember, and this is arduous because I was in really good shape even then. And I used to kind of run up these mountains, passing people like they're standing still. And I remember getting to the top of this one mountain once and sitting down and breaking out my peanut butter and jelly sandwich and just having this like just complete peace kind of wash over me as I stared out at this impeccable wilderness. And I had this kind of, I wouldn't say it a completely out of body experience, but a radical flow state where time kind of warped, and I just felt really peaceful and blissful and without any real thinking. I was just like very present. And I had a number of those experiences where I felt whole, I felt okay, but when I came out of it, then I merged back into the thinker and all the patterns that had been ingrained or trained into me. And so I kind of just set it aside. It wasn't something I knew how to use or to really, and it wasn't really meant to. I wasn't ready for it. So those things just got set aside as, hey, those are a unique experience. I had a number of really unique experiences like that, some of which would make me sound a little loony on a podcast like this, but they were really powerful. We're like, that's interesting. Like this world that we think is one thing, it's kind of like that, the line in the Matrix that this is the world that's been pulled over our eyes, right? So there's something else going on. So I kind of stored those things. But when I sat on that bench and began to stabilize my mind and learn how to concentrate longer and longer periods of time, and then to turn that attention inward and ask those questions, then those experiences started coming back to me naturally. They weren't needing to be triggered by some sort of experience outside of myself. And every time I would come off that bench, I would feel just like that experience on the mountain. I would feel completely free. Like everything I needed was right here and right now. And everything was just perfect. And yet when I looked out at my life, I said, okay, that's great. When I'm sitting there, everything's perfect. But when I look at the life that I've constructed around me, MBA, CPA, working on those, working for Coopers and Lybrand, trying to climb the corporate ladder, trying to please my parents, desires for me. I'm like, oh, all those stories are flawed because it doesn't, there's such a disconnect between the way I'm living based upon my past decisions and actually my current thinking, not my examined thinking now, but the things that I was still believing in. There was a huge disconnect between that and the way I felt about that and the way I was starting to look at that and the way I felt when I would come out of these meditation sessions. And so it created literally a midlife crisis at 23 years old. Existential crisis. Not where I wanted to go kill myself or anything like that, but where I was like, I have to do something. different. This is crazy. Like I felt this urgent need to align with, with a calling. And so I was asking, well, what is my calling? And so I would go into these meditation sessions and I would ask, what's my calling? What am I supposed to be doing? And I kept hearing warrior. You're meant to be a warrior. You're meant to be a warrior. So I started to ask how. If I'm meant to be a warrior, how? And that's when I was shown the Navy SEALs. And this is, synchronicity happens when you start to get close. When you're asking good questions and you're starting to get close to the answer, you may not be able to grab onto it with your mind yet, but you'll be shown it somehow. It'll come to you in the form of a person or a word, or for me, it came to me walking home from work, walking from work to my studio one day, and coming across a Navy recruiting office, and they had a poster on the window of the Navy SEALs. They didn't say anything about the Navy SEALs. It just said, be someone special, U.S. Navy. And I was just transfixed. I said, oh, that's it. That's it. That's my calling. And, I think I had vaguely heard of what the SEALs were. I had no interest in the military prior to this. Military, part of my conditioning was the military was for people who really couldn't figure it out in life,
Okay.
And part of that came from my father, who, was drunk and drove his car into a fraternity house. And, the judge said, basically, you have option A, you can go to jail, or option B, join the Army. And Dad said, B. He ended up in Germany with the 11th Airborne, which was like a unit that was like falling apart and really bad morale and drink. And so It wasn't not a good experience for him. Did
it make a difference though for him, the military experience?
No.
Okay.
Again, it wasn't. So it wasn't positive. So therefore, military wasn't something the Divines did.
Sure.
What the Divines did was business. And so the story of me getting my MBA, CPA, making a lot of money, and then coming home to run the family business, which had been in the family for over 100 years, that was a good story for them. And they applauded that. Boy. And so when I saw this sign, and I was like, that's it. So, it's a whole nother story I don't need to go into about the process of becoming a Navy SEAL and the trust I had to place in this kind of feeling that I had. And then also really radically orienting all of my physical training and mental training, including visualization, to see that this was the path and that I was successful at it already, even before showing up, even before getting in. It was an intense focus shift, but I knew that was the path. So anyways, I did get into the SEALs. I ended up going into BUDS Class 170 in 1990. 185 hardcore trainees classed up with me, and 19 graduated, and I graduated number one in my class, honor man.
Wow. And
there was not a doubt in my mind the whole time that this is where I was meant to be, and I would be a Navy SEAL. They'd have to kill me to get me out of there. And the instructors had nothing on my dad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But most important is the freedom that I had already accrued, and I continue to accrue this day, because you're never, there's always more work to be done. But I had already attained such a level of freedom from my thoughts and emotions from my 4 years of practice, of Zen practice, before I joined the SEALs, that, I remember, the instructors in BUDS just raining hell on us, and me just standing there feeling like I had this protected shield around me, and that the words were just bouncing off. And I was able to just calmly discern, what was being asked, and to, send directions or give my directions to my team and keep them calm. So my entire small team of 6 others and myself, we actually graduated as part of that 19 class of graduates, which has never happened before. So it was because of the leadership and the calmness I was able to share with them and to teach them these skills that I actually much later on turned into this program I called Unbeatable Mind. Because I was working with those skills early on, and I was, was able to kind of refine them later on. So yeah, then I had an active duty career that spanned close to 9 years. About 40 different countries. Really interesting. It was pre 9/11, so I didn't have that kind of hardcore combat that a lot of my more recent peers, teammates have. But I did end up, as a reserve officer, getting mobilized to go to Iraq in 2004. It was an intense experience, and ended up retiring as a commander 2011. But I got into business after my active duty career. So I started a brewing company, Coronado Brewing Company in San Diego.
Yeah.
I got out of that, sold it to my brothers because they were not wonderful business people. They were capital J jerks, and it's just got really painful. So I decided it wasn't worth the fight. And I really almost handed them my share of the business and said, you guys got it. And then I launched NavySeals.com, and then that turned into a government contract for mentoring and training Navy SEALs, and then that turned into SealFit. And then out of SealFit, I spun out Unbeatable. So the businesses that I run today. I also had a CrossFit gym for 10 years called US CrossFit. So a lot of the SEAL stuff, a lot of training that experiences of the SEALs and that entrepreneurial mindset and, really kind of get it done attitude really helped me as an entrepreneur. But I tell you what, it was the skills of Unbeatable Mind, the meditation, the visualization, the breath work, the mindfulness, all of that I started training and learning when I was 21. That's really been the most profound, those have been the most profound experiences to help me develop the leadership qualities that I have today.